welcome to the Supervisor Soapbox, where we blow the doors off of supervision. I'm Christina. Maddie, Margaret are here, and we have like a super exciting guest today. I can't believe that you actually said yes to doing this. We're so honored and thrilled that you are here. So please introduce yourself. I'm going to introduce you as the Dr. Megan Miller, but please introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself. For the random guest that doesn't know who you are, go for it.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Christina, for the introduction, and thank you to all of you for having me today. I'm Dr. Megan Miller, and I'm a behavior analyst. I work in St. Petersburg, Florida, currently providing mostly coaching and training to families and other behavior analysts on how to provide compassionate and humane behavior analytic services. So that's me.
That's it right there. That was perfect. That was so perfect. I should also preface that it is super early for all of us where we are. So that's our dedication to you, Megan, how excited we were that you were here. Yes, we do have coffee, all of us as well. So I just kind of want to jump into it first. And then Marty and Margaret, you guys are we're gonna just field questions at you, Megan. And like you said, you can do it all on the spot. But you mentioned that you are all about compassionate and humane ABA. So has it always been that way for you, or did you start working in the field and you're like, whoa, what's happening? And then you decided to go on this trajectory? Like, how did that start for you?
Well, when I first started in the field, I didn't really know much. But the very, very first experience I had with behavior analysis was an internship I did in undergrad. And I remember it was the Cleveland Clinic Center for Autism. And I remember going there and watching the work that they were doing with these kids and being like, what is happening right now? So like, for example, there was this one child who was engaging in vocal stereotypy. I didn't know that that's, what that was, but he was making sounds. And I was in charge of collecting data. So I was collecting data. They didn't explain any of it to me. They were just like, every time he makes a noise, make a mark. I was like, okay. So I did. Mm-hmm. And like the first day, his data, was like 100 or whatever. And then the second day they put in their intervention, and their intervention was to pinch his cheeks every time he made a sound. And they had me continue to collect the data, and I was watching and I was like, well, this is odd. And his cheeks started turning red. And I was like, why are we doing this? What is happening? And they were like, but look at the data. And of course, it was 100 the day before, and it was like 5 that day or something. By the end of the day, not at the beginning. At the beginning of the day, they were pinching, and that's why his cheeks were turning red. And I was like, but his cheeks are turning red. And of course, I wasn't even thinking about, obviously, back then, like, should we even be addressing this stereotypy thing, right? Like, it was just, that's the thing they said they were working on. And I just remember being like, isn't there a better way to do this? But they were so excited about the data. And, they sold that story of this will be better for life outcomes, and like he can more actively participate. And it was just one day of having to do this. And now like all these great things are going to happen for him and that kind of thing. So definitely I was the same as probably a lot of people just joining the field, where the initial procedures, I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. But then the people convinced me that, this is important and this is why we're doing it, kind of thing. Thankfully, when I moved to Florida and I worked I was a graduate student at Florida State, there was a lot more focus on making sure to use least restrictive procedures and really understand the science and do it in a way that's humane and compassionate. Dr. Bailey is one of the professors there, and Dr. Murphy. And Dr. Bailey really went over in our ethics class, like the horrific things that happened in Florida. I know some people might read about that, Sunland, the ethics book and everything, but he was there. Like he wasn't at Sunland, but he was, part of the work to get, behavior analysis recognized instead of banned when all of that was going down in Florida. And so there was a huge focus on making sure, like, if we were doing anything, and thankfully too, in Florida, the Medicaid program was really strict about like even prompting. If you touched a child for longer than 3 to 5 seconds, even if it wasn't like any sort of physical restraint, like they weren't fighting against you, you were just trying to show them how to do something, that was considered a restraint. So in your plans, you had to be able to explain like why you felt it necessary to put your hands on a person, right? So that was a big part of, you know, our coursework was learning about those policies and procedures and things like that that didn't necessarily translate to service provision. Like a lot of people still were, and I was trained to engage in the traditional procedures with like escape extinction and things like that. But thankfully, I had a few clients who were like, nope. You will not do this thing to me. And so at that point in my, like, this was, you know, 2 years into like being in behavior analysis, not certified yet or anything. And having 2 years under my belt of being trained to, when a learner doesn't do what you tell them to, you make them, right? And of course, like I said, questioning it at the beginning, but then being conditioned myself of like, this is better for them. And this is what you have to do kind of thing. But these two clients, one I had while I was a student, and one when I graduated, I took over as the clinical coordinator. So, but they were both like early on in my career. And they just thought escape extinction was hilarious. They would like run away and like hide under tables and laugh at us. And, you know, I was like, well, this isn't working. So I'd like to say the reason I initially explored other options was because I was just so appalled at what was going on, but that wasn't actually the case. It was these two kids thinking that escape extinction was funny and thinking about, okay, well, how can we modify what we typically do so that they can benefit from their skill acquisition programs, and just doing an analysis and looking at, you know, what was better for them. And that's how I came up with what I did basically, which was like shift what we were doing based on the child. We did a lot more like demand fading and shaping and basically all the things I talk about in the trainings I do now. And that was back in 2007 and 2008. So a long time ago at this point. But it was funny because there was someone on a Yahoo group. I don't even know if any of you were around then. There was a Yahoo group for behavior analysis, and someone asked a question. They had a client who like wasn't responding to typical escape extinction procedures. And I replied with what I was starting to do. And Robert Schramm replied, and he was like, have you read my book? And I was like, no. Who are you? So we connected pretty early on and started working together. And it's just been this evolving process. I absolutely loved in my graduate work what we learned about shaping and demand fading and really using, again, the least restrictive procedures, making everything as supportive and beneficial for the client as possible. And so I always operated from that place. Like I never was trained to do traditional. I mean, they taught us how to do traditional functional analysis and all that kind of stuff. But the things that people are so rigidly like sort of kind of forced to do in their training, we were never taught that way. We were always taught to be analytical and look at, you know, baby steps, what's going to be the best approach right now for this child. So that was helpful as well. And then for whatever reason, I know this is like the longest answer ever. Remember when you guys were like, we won't need that much time.
Fantastic.
I was always drawn, even in high school, to learning more about autism. I had read for class, like we had to pick 2 books to read, and I picked 2 on autism. And I was always really interested in understanding as much as I could as a neurotypical, the autistic experience. So that was one of the things at Florida State that was interesting, because I was always focused on autism, and I was reading any and every book that would come out. Like obviously everyone read Temple Grandin, but there were other autistic writers that were publishing, and I was reading their stuff too. So I was always trying to make sure when I would develop my interventions and programs that I was trying to take their perspective and really understand. And that was my one critique of my graduate experience. I was constantly told like, well, this is not a critique. This part I like. This is not an autism program. You're learning behavior analysis, right? Because I needed to know the science. That was fine. But it was kind of criticized like, well, these autistic writers, like that shouldn't inform what you're doing. Like this is a science. It's objective, blah, blah, blah. Like all the stuff that we talk about now with being able to understand people's stories and lived experience to help inform what we're doing, that was at typical, not seen as a valuable source of information and questioned. Some of the people in my early career, and even now when I talk about autistic writers, say like, well, how do we even know they have autism, and like that kind of stuff, as if it's not important to learn. So really long answer, but yes, there were parts of me that have always been, we need to do this in a compassionate and humane way. And I want to understand what I'm doing and who I'm working with. But there were parts that were shifted and pushed down based on how the field is structured.
That was a fantastic answer.
I could have made it so much shorter.
No, that was fantastic.
I think all of us had so many thoughts, like while you were speaking. My first thought actually was like, so because all your training that came from Florida, I don't want to say years ago, but like a while ago, like it sounded pretty progressive at that point, right? And it's crazy just how within, we'll say, the last 10, 15 years, it's almost gone backwards, and then we're trying to move it forwards again. Do you feel like that's happening? Because I've heard other analysts say this, like, no, it didn't turn into this, like it used to be this way, and something along the way has just progressed it into this, or fast forward into this, like, I don't know what it is now, kind of a thing. Would you agree with that?
So these are just my opinions. I'm not representing any professional entity or organization. My analysis and observation of what's happened, keeping in mind that I started in Ohio where there was no, like at the time when I started, no one was certified. I remember one of the parents being like, there's a new consultant and she says she's a BCBA. Do I need that? And we were all like, what the heck is that? Like, no, why would you need that? And this was in the place where I was working, both at the Cleveland Clinic and down in Columbus. They were replicating the EIBI model, Lovas's work and whatnot. I will say when I was at, when I had families that were working with Columbus Children's Hospital, which was one of the replication sites, the person who ran that, she was in Catherine Maurice's book and heavily involved. One of the most open and flexible people I've ever met. And Vince LaMarca used to work for the Lovas Institute. He's also one of the most flexible people I met. So it seems like there are people who were involved with EIBI who were super flexible and doing things like, yes, this is the framework, but we troubleshoot and individualize based on the child. But when the model itself was being mass reproduced throughout the country and then across the world, it became this very rigid, you must do it this way. And people were so highly motivated at the time. The narrative, we're going to save your child. We'll get them to be typical, mainstream, all this stuff. And these poor parents who had no idea what to expect, like their two options were get my kid as typical as possible, or they're going to an institution kind of framework. So they were all just as desperate as possible. Everyone was ready to just do things by the book. Exactly without any regard to, is this the best thing for the child? How do we need to individualize this? Thankfully, the 4 teams that I was on, most of them for each of the children that we were working with, things were modified based on what would go well. So for example, I had this one little guy, and he was, during our initial workshop, this was 2004. So 17 years ago, during our initial workshop, he cried so hard he threw up. And when we came back, as soon as he would see us, he would get upset, not surprisingly. As soon as he would see the table, he'd get even more upset, and he'd start screaming and crying and like want out of the bedroom. Thankfully, there was a girl who joined the case who had several years of experience providing in-home services, but she was eclectic. She had taken some training in like floor time and different things. And she joined the team a few weeks into it, and she was like, what are you doing? Why is this little kid being like locked in his bedroom and just screaming for 2 hours? And none of us on the team knew any better. This was all like our first case. We had no idea. So she was just like, get rid of the table, like do all, like, why, just play. He's 18 months old. Like, why are you doing this? You know? But the, my point in telling this story is like the family cared so much about like him. He had two siblings. They knew like where he could be. And they cared so much about like giving him the same opportunities as his siblings that they were willing to do whatever the experts said needed to be done, you know? And I thank goodness for the girl that joined the team, because I don't even want to think about how different that kid's life would have been if she hadn't come in and like demonstrated that flexibility. We completely shifted everything. He's in college now. He's amazing. He always is amazing, whether he goes to college or not. But anyway, just thinking about like the change his life would have had if we had just persisted with those traditional procedures. But my point being, so that was 17 years ago. What keeps happening is our field grew so rapidly that the people who were trained in these models, it just kept like copy and paste, right? And like, especially as it gets disseminated around the world, these models, like it's behind. I don't even want to say it's behind because it's what's happening. Like it's so whether we want to say like, well, that's what people did 20 years ago. No, that's what people are doing right now. Right. But when you think about it too, when I got trained, the people training me were doctoral level behavior analysts who worked with a wide array of differing populations and different settings, like really understood the science and could provide the type of training I received at Florida State. Now we have all of these graduate programs being run and taught by people who not only are not PhD level, not that you have to be, I'm not trying to sound elitist or anything, but like for a PhD level, 20 years experience, like working in the field, training people. That's what it was when I went through school. Now the professors may have just been certified themselves. The supervisors may have just been certified themselves. Half of our field was recently certified in the last 5 years, and pretty soon it's going to be even more than that. And that's not like, yes, I'm excited. Yay, new people. And that's so great. But who's training these people? Like how, like we went from having people with years of experience helping to train to now like that's not the case. So when people are like, it's getting better, it's getting better, it's getting better, how is that even possible when we have all of the novel things happening? And there's no, like the research that exists, we could talk about that a whole separate thing, but just like, let's take it at face value. The research that exists showing the outcomes, we could argue obviously if those outcomes are appropriate or not, but if people want to say like, well, the gold standard, blah, blah, that's not that wasn't done with the context of our field right now. That was done with graduate students at universities, overseen by people with 20 years or plus experience with the science of behavior analysis. It was not done with newly certified individuals overseeing people pulled off the streets to work with these kids who also have no experience. Like, again, like that's just where our field has gone. It's grown so rapidly. So of course we're going to, I don't know if it's even going backwards. It's just for whatever reason, I don't know if it's, well, I do know it's easier to train people on rigid procedures, right? It's easier to train people rigidly. And if you have high turnover, you just have your manual and you're like, you follow this, you do this, blah, blah. Like it's like a factory. That's easier to do than to train people to be like problem solvers and analytical and all of that kind of stuff. So it's the nature of the beast that is what grew, that those are the things like that copied and pasted and just kept going as our field exploded instead of the analytical repertoires growing. So probably around like, when I was starting in the field in 2004, a lot of people were doing the things that we say, oh, people did that 20 years ago, like I told you about. And then down in Florida and like some other places, you had Carbone and Sunberg and Partington and some others kind of pulling people in more to the verbal behavior, motivation stuff and shifting things. So like in some places that stuff did happen, but that was like a turning point too, where a few years later, the field started exploding. So, and as the field exploded, those traditional procedures that didn't take into account the child, that weren't individualized, that didn't look at motivation, still were highly available. And that got, as part of the explosion, got pushed forward much faster than the stuff that would take more response effort and all of that kind of stuff. Plus, like I talked about, all the new people with like being required and expected to train when they don't even have the experience to perform the skills necessary to just be on their own.
Yeah. So you could almost say that what we're seeing today is not ABA because the analysis piece is missing. Because
Yes.
we don't have RBTs that know how to look at a case and for themselves, have that critical thinking, those analytic skills. Because I push my RBTs. I'm like, this is not in any manual. Like it's always like the Hanley, like it depends. They'll say, well, what do I do for this? Well, it depends. What are all the environmental things happening right now? Like, is your client motivated to want to do that? Is this meeting their need? Or is this meeting someone else's need? So I think, hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, so we almost could say this is not even applied behavior analysis because there is no analysis happening at this point. It's just this mass reproduction of a set of rigid protocols where no one has to think about it.
Yep. And it's not just RBTs, let's be honest.
No. I'm just saying these poor RBTs that are just handed this book and like, no, you follow this to the T. Forget what the kid's doing.
Yeah.
Like, you just make sure you get from page 1 to page 50 by the end of the session. And I don't care if they're screaming their heads off. Like, you just do this.
Yep. And they're reinforced. The RBT receives reinforcement for getting through the thing, not what it looked like and what progress the learner's making. And that's one of the differences too. For my training, I was taught some basic behavior analytic terminology and procedures, and then just given the kids, like, there was no here's your there were program sheets and there were data sheets, but they weren't like anything like any rigid protocols or anything. It was just like, the goal is to get the kid to match. We taught you about behavior analysis, do it. Like, figure it out. So we had to be analytical and problem solve and figure things out. And it's funny because some people, I'm not saying it should be that loose either, but some people, they talk about, well, you have to train them in rigid procedures first and then get the problem solving. And I'm like, I don't know that that's true. Do we have research to demonstrate that? Because I don't think we do. I think you're most comfortable training them in rigid procedures first. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the requirement that has to be in place.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I started out, I had a very similar experience to what you described. And I was very much in a little bubble of just surrounded by the BCBAs that worked where I did. And everybody received supervision from the same people. And it was just kind of very rigid, very like mass produced of like the same like type of thinking. And it did, I did just kind of like follow things blindly because that's how I thought that it worked. And it wasn't until like the last couple of years that, I would kind of observe things and be like, there has to be a better way to do some of these things. But definitely I remember, because I started in the field in 2011, I think, and in Indiana, it was kind of what you described, that you can go to some kind of residential facility out of state, or we can try to figure some things out. And there's a lot of clinics in Indiana because Indiana was the first state to make ABA be like mandated through insurance. So we did have a lot of families then start moving to Indiana to go to these, to get different, or go to the different clinics and things. But yeah, exactly like what you described. That's kind of how I started, at least. And I've seen like a little bit of things starting to evolve, but.
And you also hit on one point that is almost like it's like a trigger for me too, is this whole like people constantly are saying like, well, research, gold standard, this is how it should be. And I think you hit the nail on the head of like, yeah, like bazillion years ago, and like not with the population that we have now and the staff that we have now. And it's honestly such a it's a huge trigger for me when I hear analysts come and program directors, making these recommendations. And again, this is my own opinion, of course, but I feel very similar and passionate of like, you, why can't we take into consideration what works for families when we're making these recommendations? And it's almost like we're getting our hands slapped constantly if we do that. And I feel like it's perpetuating this field of like, oh, this is all that they want to do. We know plenty of criticisms of this field, but I love that you said, when you're talking about gold standard and outcome study and all that, that's what it was then, but it's not what it is now. So thank you for saying that, because I feel like more people need to say that. And yeah, you're pulling, kids that just graduated college or are in college or are going to go to college off the street, and then you're putting them in these situations and you're like, bye, see you later. The BCBA is overloaded with cases, and I'll be back in a week. Try this. And meanwhile, it's like this RBT is supposed to be in a room with a kid or a family for 8 hours. And it's like, what? What do I do? Like, I don't know what to do with this kid. Oh, just play. What? You know what I mean? So it's like, it's craziness. I don't know. In my opinion, I guess, yeah. We'll keep putting that disclaimer. This is our opinion. No reflection of the board. So I have another question. So then what are your thoughts on, first of all, I think we all love how vocal you are. We love how much advocacy that you're really pushing out, because I really feel, and I think the ladies do as well, that you really do want to make this field better. And I think that you are. So what do you feel about BCBAs that are pushing back on your thoughts? Do you get that? Do you get people in your DMs, Megan, that are like, what are you doing? You're wrong.
Not anymore.
Okay.
I did. Not in my DMs either. It was all text messages, but mostly. But I think so. There's a couple of things. One, I thankfully get a lot of DMs of people saying like, thank you for saying that. These are thoughts I'm having, but I don't feel comfortable putting them out there. I don't want to lose my job, etc. So it's giving them permission and a space to feel what they're feeling and keep moving forward. I've had a ton of people contact me and say, oh my goodness, like I've always wanted to practice the way that you're training, but people tell me I'm soft, or they say that this isn't behavior analysis. And I used to give like nicer answers of like, oh, well, let me, provide you some resources and things. But now I'm like, ask them where their research is that says you can't perform this way and that it's soft, and like, what's wrong with soft? Lean into being soft. It's okay. Like, what? Excuse me, but when did what? Why are we not allowed to be soft? We're a human services field. Shouldn't we be soft? Don't social workers and like counselors get trained on how to be soft? Like, what?
Yes, exactly.
So like, why is that a bad thing? Don't let people tell you soft is bad. Like, that's ridiculous. And same with like, I'll get occasionally, I don't know if they're doing it in a way that like they're trying to be mean or questioning me, or if they're legitimately following the what we're conditioned to do of like ask for research. But I'll get the emails that are like, oh, I saw your work on alternatives to extinction. Can you send me some research on that? And I used to have like say, oh, sure, here's these articles or whatever. I kind of at this point want to be like, have you done try doing a Google Scholar search and see what you come up with that supports extinction, because you're not going to find it. Mm-hmm. Like, if you look at the articles that exist on extinction in the context that we're using it, there isn't anything. So why are you using it blindly? I don't understand. I haven't yet given that snarky of an answer, but that's like where I want to be with it. Still right now, I'm like, you'd be surprised to find out. But I'm doing a presentation for this group on September 14th, and I will have some of that information in there because I always update my presentations. So I'm going to be going over some of that research, but I want to do like a longer training or presentation on extinction that kind of is like a historical look at things, because I have one that I do go over like the past research and the current research. That's like a quick overview, but not as detailed as I think. Because even with that, I still get people being like, yeah, but this is how we're supposed to do it. And I'm like, okay. But really, I've been encouraged and inspired when we had that panel, Mari, in May, when you said the quote about growth. And I had, even before that panel, because I just don't have the time or energy to spend on people that don't have the same values as me and like, you know, those kinds of things. So I had shifted quite a bit initially, like last summer, when I first started getting more of this pushback. I was trying to like work with people and say like, oh, but what about this? And like, but it was very clear pretty early on that the people that were pushing back against me had no motivation or anything to actually hear my side. And like they wanted to tell me, show me what it is, and like have me accept what they were saying, which I was open. I'm always open and curious to like, I know I'm not perfect. I will gladly hear your perspective and see what things I can, you know, shift and do differently based off of that. However, if it's not a two-way street, if you're not also willing to hear my perspective and think about what you could do differently based off of that, then I don't have the time and energy for this. So I even recently, like in the fall, I guess it wasn't that recent, maybe January timeframe, had some back and forth with a bigger name in the field who seemed open to talking about some things. And so I set up a meeting with them, and they were easy enough to talk to. However, they kept coming back to like the things they wanted me to change. And when I would bring up like, well, you know, okay, but what else? Like I've seen these things where people are wanting y'all to change some things. So what reflection have you done on that? And they didn't really have an answer. So I said, okay, well, you know, I'm happy to take, you know, your feedback and I'll reflect on what I can do with it. I hope you'll do the same. And we had some additional email correspondence. We shared some resources with each other. And after they viewed one of my resources, they sent me a really long, like 2-page letter of all of the things in the webinar I shared with them that they disagreed with. And it was interesting because the webinar was it was about coercion, and it was mostly quotes from Marie Sidman and things like that. So really the person disagreed with Sidman, not me, but whatever. But everything in there was all like disagreeing with me, telling me where I was wrong, and like blah, 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 and very ego-based. Not a single aspect of the email answered any of the things we had previously talked about for their own reflection and changing their own, like anything about themselves. So initially I was like, how do I respond to this email? Like, what do I say? Do I even respond? Do I continue with this conversation? And ultimately what I decided is like historically in the past, especially with like the position of this person being like much older than me and like much more established, like initially, like my initial thing was like, oh, I should be like submissive and, you know, just whatever they tell me to do, I should do it and that kind of thing. But I was like, no, F that. I'm not like that. And again, maybe if they had demonstrated some reflection on their own, I would have continued it. But I was like, I just don't have the time for this. So I emailed back and said, you know, thank you for taking the time to like write your feedback or whatever. I've noticed that it's all continuing to focus on where you disagree with me and things you want me to change. And I didn't notice any reflection on your end. So at this point, I'm not going to continue this conversation. I don't put energy towards these types of things. I said it probably nicer than that, but either way, the point is I'm more than happy if there are people that have feedback, and I would love it. Like I ask for it all the time, and I really get the two extremes. It's like the people who are like, yes, this is amazing, let's keep going. And then I get the people who are like, shut it down, stop doing all the things you're doing, and like you're ruining the field. And there's never like this middle ground of like, hey, you're doing these things that are really great, and like this could be done better, right? Like I would love that kind of feedback. So if anybody has it, share it with me. But yeah, but basically if they're on that other extreme, if it's just like I'm coming in from my ego to tell you how you're wrong and you need to change, I don't have time for that. That's divisiveness. I'm not going to put any of my energy towards that. That they do them, and like I used to worry about like how can we like shift those people? How can we get them to like move with us? But at this point, it's just like you're over there. Maybe we have to wait until you're retired. I don't know. But yeah, so that, and then of course with the quote from Mari that's about growth, like we grow what we love. I'm really focusing on that piece of it, like the growth aspect.
Well, and Marty, like I have a question for you, like, because I mean, you know, I feel like Marty's like that perfect example. Not to be like, sorry, Marty, you're not the token person, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like, you have both sides. So I think Margaret and I are always texting Marty, like, do I engage with this person right now? I mean, do you do that often too, Marty? Like, being a BCBA and also being autistic, just have to be like, okay, I just have to walk away from this because this person doesn't want to grow?
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is, even recently, I had in my DMs a young individual who was autistic that was sending me screenshots of another BCBA's post. And they were like, you've got to address this. This is so insulting to me. This is so triggering. You know, I know you don't work this way, and I really would like for you to address it. And so I had to like sit back for a second and think like, how do I want to address this young autistic individual who is about that, like, you know, kind of fighting what you hate mentality, right? Because, and obviously because that was something that was very triggering to them. And so it really became about helping them to realize like that person I probably can't change. And I can either spend a lot of energy, you know, putting my contradicting comments, you know, on that post that they created, or I can help this young, you know, autistic individual that reached out to me to say, you know what, like those are not the people that you need to focus your energy on. Those people are going to exist. And when you start building and growing what you love, what you're doing is creating a much clearer delineation of this way that we are moving away from, and this way that is honoring and affirming to the neurodiverse community. And so sometimes you have to have very clear non-examples in order to really highlight, like, this is how different we are. And so, you know, it took a lot of, even for myself, reading those comments from that BCBA, because it is triggering to me too. Like, oh, I really want to comment on this and I want to say something. Then I'm like, you know what? No, I'm way too busy. I need to focus. And so, yeah, that happens, but on both sides for me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's true. I think I'm more of a, well, Megan, I took one of your trainings where you gave an example of like the YouTube videos are out, like the sunshine,
the sunrise. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, talking about ABA and how like, I loved it because I felt so seen, like how you would comment, like, that's not what this is, you know, and you would have this arguments back and forth because you want to defend. I feel probably like maybe 6 months ago I was there, or because when I remember taking that training, like, oh, I think that's me right now, because you know you want to do that because you want to defend the field, because you fall in love with the field, you fall in love with like the good that it can bring, and I think too the individuals you work with that are they change you for the better, you know, and so sometimes I think I want to show that. And then I do realize, like, no, you have to walk away because it's not worth it. You know, like both of you were saying, it's not worth the energy. You have better things to do, and it's not going to change anyways. So, good points. I would agree with both of you. Go ahead. So, did you want to say something, Marty? Sorry.
Well, I just like through this whole conversation have been, and this is just kind of the way my brain thinks, looking at like a lot of the double standards that we've had in our field, you know. And I was talking to my husband about this because I said, you know, I work on posts and I'm like, I need like some kind of visual, because it just kind of hit me one day that, wow, when a child that's autistic is ignoring people, right? They're in their own little world because the people around them like have nothing that interests them. It becomes a target behavior. But then when the child engages in a behavior that we don't like or that we don't approve of, it's like, oh, we're going to put that on extinction. We're going to ignore that. So I'm like, in one instance, ignoring is a target behavior, but then it's also an intervention, so I just, always look at reframing that for people that are neurotypical to stop and pause and go, oh, wait, yeah, that kind of doesn't make sense. Or like when you were sharing, Megan, about the pinching the cheeks, like, wow, so that's like a target behavior for an autistic child. They go up and pinch people. So we've got to stop that behavior. But we're also going to use it as an intervention when they, are engaging in vocal stereotypy. So I always just kind of like think of this reframing, like helping people to see, like, doesn't that like not make sense that it's not okay for the child to do these things, but yet we're engaging in these behaviors and calling them interventions. So no, that just kind of was where my mind was going as you were sharing, like some of these things that, for you, Megan, you're like, this feels icky. This does not feel right. Like, I don't know. But then you get sold on this whole, like, we're data science, we're data scientists. Like, we're all about the numbers and these beautiful graphs. And you forget that there's this human being attached to this. And you are so, like, I don't want to say seduced, but you're persuaded, like, to pull away from this humanity piece of it to the humane side of yourself. And you're like, it's all for the sake of data. And I think many people are waking up and going, holy shit, I forgot how to just be a human being to this other little human being, So yeah.
And can we talk about that, Megan? Do you feel like we're like obsessed with data, like to the point where it's like, calm down? You know what I mean? Can I just play with this kid for like 10 minutes? Do I need to check a box every single time? I mean, all of us have talked about that. Like, what are your thoughts? I feel like we're a little too data obsessed. Like, what do you think?
Sure. So yes, we are. I mean, look at our task list. Where in there is anything about humanity? First of all, we're a human services science, and what items on our task list touch on anything relating to developing, connected, trusting relationships? Like, again, if you look at other psychology-based, educational-based human services, any of those things, like their training incorporates a ton of information on like how to develop trusting and connected relationships, right? And there are some things now, especially around like supervision and whatnot, but it's not nearly what you would expect to see for the type of work that we do. And like how often we are with vulnerable populations in positions of power. And there's nothing barely touched on in our ethics code around like how to make sure you're not, bringing in your own biases, abusing the power that you have, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's one piece of it. Look at our research. The fact that Dr. Hanley's research that is so freaking phenomenal in advancing our field has people pushing back and being like, 100%. Oh, no way, you can't do that. Here's my research to show how yours isn't working. And side note, I don't actually understand your research and didn't take the time to learn it. So I'm just really putting this box here, but it really doesn't exist. And I'm going to subject actual humans to ridiculous procedures to prove that I'm right and you're wrong with my data. Like, what? Yeah. No, thank you. I have a whole podcast episode where I like talk about that for like hours because it disgusts me that that's even allowed, that like an IRB would even approve that research. Like, what are we doing here? You're going to train I don't even remember if it was 3, 5, 7, it was some odd number of autistic adults on a problem behavior of touching a button so that you can prove that function needs to be isolated. Why are we wasting someone's time like this? Like, I don't understand at all. And then of course, like I haven't experienced it myself, but I have colleagues who've worked at some of the behavior, like the places that target intensive, challenging behavior and that are basically, well respected and well known. And I'm not saying they haven't potentially made amazing changes for certain individuals, and they're not doing it in a way that's necessarily humane. It's like, at what cost? What is the quality here? What are the effects afterwards? Nobody's questioning those types of things, because what do? They don't look at any of that. They look at the graphs, and the graphs are pretty, and make it into Java and show good experimental control. These are not research experiments. The humans that we serve are not research experiments. They're humans, humans first. And that's the other thing. So the two last things I'll say on it. One, the centers and in-home, the university programs, like all of the places that are providing, whether it's one-on-one, like home-based services, clinic-based services, if it's a severe challenging behavior clinic, whatever it is, that's serving the community, where the clients come as just like any other thing. It could be a school, whatever, but they operate as if every single one of those people in there is a research study. They get, their data taken. They have to have some type of design, whether it's multiple baseline or reversal, whatever it is. Every single program is done in that way instead of a more naturalistic way. So that usually to their own benefit, so that they could retroactively use it for research if they wanted to. That to me shows way too much of an obsession on data. Like, you're like at the cost of these individuals' lives and like their freedom, and how their own just natural development should be occurring. You're going to structure their life so artificially and with such rigid rules just so you can have your pretty graphs. Are you kidding me right now? Like, and I understand there has to be a balance. Like, we need to be able to make database decisions, but we can do that without, like, if you're doing applied work, if you're not in some situation like, getting your doctorate or whatever, if you're doing applied work, these are insurance funded clients, these are families paying, these are schools, whatever it is, it's not okay to treat every single person like a research study. And I could go on a separate thing about, even if you're getting your doctorate, it's not okay either. But we could probably have a whole separate podcast episode on that. And the last thing I'll say is I did a training. I did like an intensive advanced workshop on early start Denver model, which uses momentary time sampling. It's basically momentary time sampling a little bit. And then they also use, it's all time sampling data collection. And you pretty much like you put a plus or a minus, like, did the thing happen or not, right? And it was hilarious to watch the like 10 other BCBAs that were there with me who had never been required to take more flexible data like that and to just play and enjoy the child. And then like at the end of like 15 minutes, actually like note down, did the thing happen or not? It was difficult for them. Like, they just constantly like wanted their data, like their clipboard, and like to take the things. And it's like, you can't have, especially with a birth to 5 population, connected relationships and interactions, and like really work on the things that would benefit them if you're constantly taking data. But it was so hard for them to let that go. And when they finally did, and they saw like the difference and like how much better their interactions were with the kids that they were working with, they loved it. But they were very, very hard to like say, okay, I don't need to take data every 2 seconds.
No, that's such a good point, especially the little. Yeah, could you imagine? It's impossible. You won't have that connection if you're constantly, on your phone.
And Megan, it's funny that you mentioned that about like the whole research, like not everybody is your research study. And that was actually something I put in the comments from that Hanley Q&A the last couple of days ago, because I was like, that's the model that everyone's been trained on. Yes. Is you are a little research scientist. You are not a compassionate practitioner. Like we created this. Yeah. And I think, that I'm laughing that you said that, people are actually trying to rebuttal Hanley. And I'm thinking of another panel where he was talking about he would teach a class, and the class was like, all the assholes in ABA that have done research. I'm like, okay, so he's adding people to that list of, but even all the way back to your first comments about the books that you were reading, about autistic individuals and their lived experiences, that's social validity. And I would love to see our field move a little bit more towards, like, I don't care that you have 50 pages of data collection. Like, where's your social validity? Where is the measure pre-intervention, during intervention, and post-intervention? Like, to me, that's that, and it's hard because it's more of qualitative data than it is quantitative. And I
Mhm.
think that's the hard shift for our field is like, what? I don't need all these, like, ticks and slash marks and all these things. I just need to ask the family, like, is the person happier? Are they more engaged? Are you able to go to the grocery store? Like those kinds of, the questions that are important. So that's my hope, because I think that's what we're sorely lacking is the social validity measure.
Yeah. For the family and for the
Mhm.
person participating in the research. And that piece as well. I mean, Hanley's doing a really good job modeling that. They incorporate a lot of social validity measures in their work. They only provide the intervention if the actual participant is willing, which is a huge shift that they started, a few years ago. But like, when will that be required for all of our research?
Mhm.
Right? Like, when will it be necessary that you can't just take adults and train them, waste their time, their precious time, teaching them silly responses so you can try to prove your functional assessment method is better? Like, what?
Right.
So anyway, yeah. There, like I said, there's a whole lot we could talk about with research.
Yeah. Margaret, did you want to wrap it up with another comment, or I know we're getting close to.
Well, no, I was just gonna say I've had a lot of light bulb moments in the last few weeks. So the bulk of my ABA career, I've worked in a clinic setting or a little bit in home. And this year I decided I have a teaching license as well, and I decided to go back to the classroom. Um, so I am currently a life skills teacher in an elementary school. And there's just so many moments that I've had thinking about doing things in a clinic setting, and even like the different goals that I've worked on. And it's like, where is this goal actually going? Because
Mhm.
if our goal is to transition these kids to a lesser restrictive environment, a lot of practitioners don't have knowledge of what that environment actually looks like or how it
Yep.
functions. Um, so I have also enjoyed being the one to actually work with the kids. I think sometimes BCBAs get so far removed from like actually doing the one-on-one implementation that it's easy to just look at the data and be like, no, we need to do this way, but it's a lot harder to jump in and you're the one actually doing it all. So your piece about the early start Denver model just made me laugh, because like I said, I've just had a lot of light bulb moments that's like, okay, was I putting unrealistic expectations on RBTs? Because this is hard.
Yeah.
And especially, I have some paras in my room, but it's mostly me in charge of all these kids. And it's like, some of the things that I've done in the past just aren't realistic to moving those kids towards their lesser restrictive environment.
Yeah. Well, and that you're probably getting a good feel on like the data collection too. I don't understand why we don't make more use of sampling. I remember sitting in on IEP meetings where the teachers would say like, oh, well, we're taking, this data like 3 times a week or whatever. They had their sampling procedures, and we were trained like, oh no. And like, to try, like, can you imagine what kind of like assholes they thought we were? Like,
Yeah.
no, you have to be collecting that data every minute of the day, and it's like, so not realistic. I've never been in a classroom, even though I have my PhD in education. Like, I've always done one-on-one work. I've done a little bit of stuff in the classroom, but not to the level where I would, claim any sort of expertise or anything. So from the data angle, I don't understand why people can't find that balance. And what's most realistic too, if you, especially with sampling, if you can have like the certain context and like like if you keep the time the same, so like it's a once a week thing on Fridays at 1 during this activity, you can compare what happened
Mm-hmm.
over the course of several Fridays and see if you have any changes. Like, you don't have to have minute by minute data collection. And a lot of the times, if you're trying to place that type of requirement on someone, it's probably not accurate data. If
No.
it's either going to be inaccurate data that you're looking at, or the child is not benefiting because they're so focused on the data, the kid's not actually getting the intervention that they're supposed to be getting.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, and I was talking with one of the special ed teachers that have been working at the school for a long time, and I was specifically talking about data collection and like their IEP goals. And I was like, okay, how often do I need to do this progress monitoring? And they were saying even like once or specifically, you need a point in there like 3 or 4 times like a semester. I thought, wait, what? Okay, I really need to like think through these things because it's been, a challenge. But yeah, I have shifted towards maybe like once a week. I'm gonna compare this scenario because yeah, I mean, you don't need to take data every second of the day. Building those relationships is important, and like actually getting a feel for like what works and what doesn't. And I mean, data sometimes needs to be secondary to
Yes.
those different things. So yeah, it's just I feel like everybody needs to have these different experiences because I mean, again, like the clinic that I've had always worked at, whenever I started, you're so like isolated in this little bubble, and you just need these different experiences. You need to talk to different people. You need to have your thoughts challenged, and all of those things. It's so important to moving forward.
Yeah. I have one thing that came up for me, Margaret, while you were talking about that, and I know we're close on time here. I have a person I was talking to, I think earlier this week, who she's phenomenal. It's a mom, and she could run circles around most behavior analysts. Like she is just one of the best at observing what's going on with her child, the full context, and making decisions based off of that. And that's another thing that gets lost if you're so focused on data collection. I'd rather have people that can be nimble and flexible and really picking up on these are all the variables that are occurring right now, and this is what I need to do based off of that. And everything shifted. Now I need to shift. And they're good at like reading the situation, and they have a strong enough understanding of the science and what would work or wouldn't work, and they can make those decisions quickly in the moment, as opposed to let me jot down all this data. Let's look at a graph after the fact, figure out what we might want to change later. Now, I will say the reason we were having this conversation is she sucks at taking data. So like she can make these really great decisions in the moment and whatnot. But it's hard to balance doing that and being so phenomenal at that and getting really good data at the same time. And we were going over like some charts and graphs and things, and seeing how we were watching a precision teaching presentation, and oh my goodness, it was from Kelly Ferris, and she's just amazing. It was the conference that the Standard Acceleration Society did recently, and she just had these amazing charts where they were making all these really cool decisions for their clients. And it's like, well, we don't have that because we don't have the data, but we can't get the data and the in the moment decision making because she's just one person with 2 kids, right? Like,
Right.
but Kelly is at a clinic where there's like people that can collect the data. So it's like balancing all of that can be really hard. But we basically, the discussion ended up with like in the long run, ultimately being able to make the best decisions in the moment is most meaningful to the child than like having the data to look back at after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we should end there. That was perfect. That's exactly what we're gonna say.
In the moment, relationships.
In the moment, yes. And I hope that our science is going to continue to move towards that. Like we've all said, of course, it's important, but we work with humans, bottom line, and that's what we need to continue to focus on. Megan, we could talk to you for like another 4 hours, but I know you're super busy.
Part 2.
Yes, we really hope you come back because I think that LEAP is trying to really, we're trying to put out future analysts that are compassionate and humane and want to advance this field. And I feel like you're, one of the trailblazers that are trying to continue to do that. And you're a woman, and we need more women to really like push this through. So, and I love that you say stuff and you don't care who it pisses off. And I just think that that's amazing. We need more of that in this field too. So, seriously, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. Like, I can't believe you said yes. This is fantastic.
Well,
Yes.
I was really excited to chat with you. I know we follow each other on Instagram, and I love all the different posts and everything, and I'm learning just as much from the three of you. So I appreciate everything you all are doing, and I would definitely be happy to do a part 2 at some point. So
Yay! All right.
Awesome.
Well, in that case, we're going to stand off of our soapbox and we'll talk soon.
sounds good.
Awesome.